Hey solos! So I have a really great solo story for you today. It's not actually a solo story in so much as a conversation about solo travel to Disney that really kind of was about somebody's solo trip and how it could affect your own solo trip. So I'm really excited to share that with you. Hi everyone, it's Samantha. Olaf may not know who Samantha is, but now you do, and welcome to Disney Solo Magic, the #1 podcast for solo travel to Disney World, now being published on Thursdays. So if you saw my little post that I posted on Tuesday, I said that I really wanted to move the schedule over from posting on Tuesdays to Thursdays because there's a lot of podcasts that get posted on Mondays and Tuesdays. And I know I always was like, well, what can I listen to on like Thursday and Friday? And what can I listen to when I'm going for walks on the weekend? And I thought maybe that would be the case for you. But also I thought it would help with my own workload. And so I hope that change isn't super difficult for you. I also had posted a Patreon bonus episode and I made that available on Tuesday. So I hope you took advantage of that. You can listen if you are a paid member or a free member. So go and take a look and check that out. But today's interview is with Mel Greer, who is a co-founder of Mourning Feather Doulas. And she is very much a person who is interested in talking more about grief and the ways that grief shows up in people's lives and the intersection between that and Disney. And when she got in touch with me for this conversation, I just thought, wow, that would be really great because I think that grief is always kind of close to certain elements of our solo travels to Disney. And to make it a little bit more prominent in our conversation, I just thought was really, really important. And it was a really great conversation. If you're worried like, ooh, grief, that might be a little too heavy, a little too heavy on this particular week or whatever, I totally get that. But it's actually a really uplifting conversation and it's a really thoughtful conversation. I really loved when we had it because it really is talking about the ways to integrate and consolidate and bring in grief as a celebration of love really into your solo Disney trips. So I hope you love the conversation as much as I do. You can get the link to Mel's work, Mourning Feather Doulas, down below. All of the services are free for Mourning Feather Doulas. And so again, if that is something that you think is important as a fit in your life right now, go check them out. Also, her personal Instagram is there too. So if you wanted to just connect with her just generally, you can. She's really, really wonderful. Remember, if you wanted to watch our conversations, you can become a Patreon member. There's a 7-day free trial and all of our conversations are available on YouTube as videos. What else? So my social media links are down below as well, and you can listen to this on Apple, Spotify, and on YouTube. It's really wonderful when you subscribe and you like and you do all of those things and you share and you follow and all those things. Thank you so much. And as I've said in every episode, I feel like for a while now, life has been so busy and I've just been so kind of distracted. So I'm getting back into my DMs, and when I see your comments on the YouTube videos or when I see your comments on DMs, it just really warms my heart to know that like people are out there listening, and it is really it's really useful when I'm creating my to-do list for the day to be like, yes, Disney Solo Magic. And when I was editing this episode for posting on Thursday, it just felt like a little bit more energy than how I normally have scheduled the work for Sundays and Mondays. So I'm excited about the change in schedule, and I'm hoping it will bring me a little bit more connected to social media life outside the podcast, as related to the podcast. And I can't wait to get back into that. All right. Anything else? No, let's get right on into it. Hey Solo, so since the time of recording the introduction and recording the interview, there's been some news about a woman who took her own life at the Contemporary Resort over the last couple of days. And I just wanted to, first express my condolences, obviously, to the family, and my heart breaks about that being a decision that somebody felt like they needed to make for their life. If you are struggling, we are going to deal with grief, although I know from doing the interview, it's actually a very positive and uplifting type of episode. If you are struggling with any sort of suicidal ideations or thoughts of self-harm, to make sure that you reach out for help. There is a suicide crisis helpline, which is 988, that I believe is both in that code works in both the United States and in Canada, and to reach out to friends, to family, to a hospital, to a therapist, in order to get the support that you need, because we need you here. We need you here, and we need you going to Disney, and we need you feeling like life is wonderful and magical, and because it is. So I hope you enjoy this conversation about grief, and I hope it isn't triggering. I do think it's really uplifting and a really healthy way to talk about something that is part of our lives always, but we don't talk about it that often. And I think it's a great interview. And again, if you need any support, please reach out to the Suicide Crisis Helpline at 988. Okay, let's get into our conversation. Hi, Mel. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So you got in touch with me regarding coming on the podcast to talk. And I really appreciate that, because you want to talk about something that kind of, oh God, I'm already regretting saying this, but I'm not going to, that haunts a lot of the conversations that we already have about solo trips at Disney World. And that is related to grief and solo travels to Disney.
Yes, yes. My best friend and I started a not-for-profit that is called Mourning Feather Doulas. And we are a grief support resource education for our local community in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I took my first solo trip, big thanks to you in this podcast
Thank
this year.
you.
And I just spent a lot of time on that trip thinking about it through the lens of grief care and how it can be a supportive place to kind of go through your next piece of your grief journey.
Yeah, and grief is so, like I said, grief does show up on this podcast a lot. I can think of like multiple solo stories in which people are talking about going to Disney because of somebody that has passed, or, kind of snaking their way through a lot of conversations are Disney as a healing place, and often related to something that has been lost, whether that is a person or something else in their lives. And I think that we definitely haven't explicitly ever talked on the podcast specifically about grief, but that it is a really important thing to kind of acknowledge as part of people's solo journey. So thank you for like saying we should talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about grief in all spaces at all times, anyone that will listen, because I'm on like a personal mission to make this something we talk about rather than kind of suffer through alone.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we like to say, as a culture, we don't talk about it, and that certainly is true. But Disney, as a culture, has created cultural products, I should say, that has actually mentioned grief, because they often center bonds, and when there are bonds and those bonds get broken, there is a grief associated with it. So while, quote, as a culture, we don't talk about it this much, Disney actually allows us to, I think, in really powerful ways.
Yeah, I think they do a really great job kind of showing that there's this, normalcy to experiencing grief in your life. We've got like The Lion King, Simba loses his dad, and it's this like heart-wrenching moment. And, I saw that when I was fairly young. And it was kind of like, oh, I've felt that before. And now here
Mm.
I am seeing it represented in a way that like reminds me of that feeling, but also makes me feel not alone. Like this is something we share as human beings.
Hmm.
And I think they just do a great job of letting feelings be big and recognized,
Yeah, and we, as people like Disney adults, however that sounds like for people, we talk about this too, but without explicitly talking about it, right? Like when you said big emotions, when people talk about crying during the fireworks, right? We don't often say, well, what are those tears about? Because there's this like, there's so many personal stories that are coming with them, but a lot of them are around grief.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's just such a special place. And I think it just does a wonderful job of allowing you to have space for whatever you're coming with and also infuse joy into all of that. And I think we really need that reminder of these two things can be true at the same time. I can be grieving a loved one, a pet, a relationship, a job, and I can enjoy myself and I can find the light, throughout the day. So,
And
um,
I know there are some people that are hesitant to take solo trips because of grief itself, because they have experienced the joy in this place with a person or well, I have another example, but I'll pause that for a second with a particular person or a group of people. And now they're like, I don't want to go because I think it will be too hard. And so I'm glad that we're talking about this in this podcast to address some of that. But also, we have holidays coming up. We have Canadian Thanksgiving in October, American Thanksgiving in November, and Christmas, along with non-Western holidays and, all of these other Kwanzaa and Hanukkah and things like that. And so when we're thinking about how to mark or celebrate some of these moments, that grief can pull us down, and it's nice to see a place of kind of like a beacon of joy. So can you talk about your first solo trip and how you first started seeing your connection with grief kind of interwoven with this travel?
yeah, yeah. My first solo trip was kind of for two reasons. One, I was going with this idea of I really want to think about a grief support thing while I'm at Disney and like what grief resources there already exist. And the good thing about Disney is a lot of the cast members are trained in empathy and compassion, and they're not counselors, but they know how to respond to situations when you're feeling a lot of feelings or
Mm-hmm.
having a bit of a moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that baseline is nice to know and nice to keep in your mind if you're planning a trip that you think you might feel a little rocky at times on. And for me, I was also going to meet up with a friend while I was there who she had lost her husband, and he was a close friend of mine and my husband's. And we just had this great conversation while we were at Epcot about how they had never gotten to go on their Disney trip together. He passed away before that. And, I was just like, what do you think he would have liked? And it was just this really lovely conversation that was, there was sadness in it, but there was also so much joy and excitement and jokes and laughs. And it was just a nice way to remember somebody that meant a lot to both of us. And I mean, you can do that on your own as well, even if you're not meeting up with somebody or you're not with family. You can kind of go through and be like, yeah, my person would have loved that. Or, my person would have hated that. And that could be maybe like a funny joke to, like he would never wait in that line, whatever it might be. But I think we do that anyway when we're grieving, right? We look at things and we think, if they could see this, or they would hate to see this, or so it's okay to do it at Disney. There's no, that's not like a bubble that where it's not allowed. And I just think it just feels like such a safe place. And I think if you're a person who's going to go solo anyway, it's still going to feel that safe, even if you're going there with a grief intention in your mind.
Yes, and I think that, even if you're not meeting up with someone to talk about somebody that has passed, like you said, the cast members, I've heard stories from cast members who have been friends with particular characters and people who have gone to meet particular characters, and they both have told stories about sharing a loss with a character and that the character is just there for a hug and like to be able to make that connection is part of that process of saying like it's okay to be here and like smile in this picture, but also like share this little thing, like bring
Yeah.
out some of this connected magic to somebody else, to others, to the story that is Disney.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's to each person's comfortability. You maybe
Hmm.
bring a picture and show Mickey, your person or your pet, or share a memory or something. Or maybe you don't, and that needs to be a personal moment for you, that you sit and reflect somewhere quiet, or journal about it. I took my journal and would occasionally pull my journal out while I was like kind of making loops around Epcot on a lazy day, and we just kind of like write some thoughts. It doesn't have to be like a program that you're doing.
Hmm.
You can make this your personal thing, and if you come up against something that doesn't feel like right at the moment, then you don't do it. But there's so much at Disney to kind of inspire you, I think, that it's just a lovely way to heal and move through feelings, and spend some good time with yourself. I don't think we do that enough. Like in life in general, we don't really spend time alone and processing thoughts. And a solo trip will really do that. So, it's a good
Yeah,
one.
I think that Disney has this reputation for being so busy and go, 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 and especially with like all the different lightning lanes that you're constantly on your phone. But so many solos that I've talked to, the fact is like it doesn't have to be that way, especially when you're going solo, and that it is the time, these pockets of time in these pockets of places where you're by yourself that you are really doing like the quote unquote work
Mhm.
of being at Disney solo. And of course you don't need to like do the work, but like do that like you've been drawn to Disney solo for a particular reason and what that looks like. And if it's just have a little cry and then do all those fun like rides and attractions and things like that, that's okay. But like that solo travel to Disney really allows for that because there are places to do that and it can be a place that is really just like without time.
Yeah, yeah. I decided to pixie dust for the first time while I was on
Okay.
my solo trip. And I mean, it was one of the best things about my trip, honestly. It was just taking the time to place these little trinkets and then sit back and just kind of like watch this joy unfold that like had something to do with me, but really had nothing to do with me? And so it was just really lovely to watch that. And that was a really good way to kind of feel like, oh, you know, this place is about love and spreading joy. And if you were to do that in a memorialization type of way for, someone that you're thinking of, how lovely it is to think about strangers at Disney, just thinking about your person or your pet for a moment, and just that just feels good. That's just
Yeah.
kind of like a warm hug. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And Olaf does love warm hugs.
that's right.
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about too is I saw this woman on Threads. She had said that like I would love to go to Disney solo, but the fact is every time I see like couples or young families, I'm just overwhelmed with a form of grief that is not my own. And I like responded by saying like, yeah, but you need to remember that like a lot of these Disney princesses actually were not going after a princess. They were going just after like whatever, whatever. And I don't think that message really resonated with her. And I've always really thought of that when I am creating content for this solo travel because there is an element that a version of one's life, like you're grieving a version of one's life by being there. And I totally understand that. But I also see it as a celebration of these new things. And I think that your work related to grief can also talk so much about joy and that intermingling, that awkward intermingling. Could you talk a little bit more about that? That notion of joy and grief, especially as it relates to a Disney trip or just like Disney media generally?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I personally, on my trip, part of my kind of like thoughts and intentions when I was going was, I'm entering a new phase of life. My
Mm,
kiddos moved out. I'm a woman of a certain age, I guess we could say. And so, things are changing, and like, what do I want this to look like now? Like, how will life be? And there's grief in that because things have always been a certain way. I've always been someone's mom, and I'm still someone's mom, but I'm not like shuttling anybody from A to B. I'm not going to like after school activities. Like, it's a big change. And so grief can exist in just transitions in our lives. And I think we get really cozy with how much that makes us feel kind of wiggly and uncomfortable inside. And because a lot of the outside world tells us that's how we're supposed to feel and that we should focus on those feelings and fix them. We aren't going to fix them. We're going to grow around our grief. We're never going to get rid of it. So I think a Disney trip can kind of just, it's almost like an injectable joy that you can't avoid, right? So I mean, I was just finding myself having these thoughts of like, wow, my kid's grown. I'm gonna have so much more time, and like, what will I do with that time? And then something would happen, the Dapper Dans would come out and start singing, and I would be like in this moment of joy that would almost force my brain to reroute. And it was very interesting to look at it through like the grief lens because we don't get that in most days of our normal life, I mean, if we have pets, maybe a little bit more than the average person because they can just kind of show up with whatever and distract you. But I mean, I think this notion that we have to feel one way at some point in time about our loss or transition, and we can't feel joy and happiness or even just general feelings of okayness, alongside of those things, it's just not true. It's not how it works, and I think it creates guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And and I mean, what a terrible thing to do to yourself, to put yourself on a hamster wheel of feeling guilty for feeling good when you feel bad, and just it's just never gonna, you're just gonna keep going. So I think for soloists, there's such an opportunity to, go to Disney and have your trip. And if these things come up there, take advantage of the joy that's there. And if you find yourself getting really, really low, maybe you have the energy to go find a little extra joy over there, by riding your favorite ride. Or maybe you just need to feel that low right now, and you're going to go back to your room and chill out and take care of yourself, because we don't do that on a daily basis. We can't. Our lives are busy and fast. And I mean, if I've got meeting after meeting after meeting and I'm grieving all day long, whatever, where am I grieving? Where I'm doing it over top of these things that still have to keep me moving. And I think a solo trip gives you the opportunity to really kind of focus and say, no, now's the time for me to go have a cry. And
Mm-hmm.
that's okay, because I have the time. And then I'm gonna, freshen up and I'm gonna head to some fireworks and I'm gonna feel that joy. I think
Or like hold those tears in until the fireworks, and then everything goes down. You can just sob.
stop. I sob every single time I see the fireworks. And it has nothing to do necessarily with grief most of the time. It's just joy coming out of my body. And I think, yeah, it's a space for it. And we need to talk about it more with each other, and we need to be more public with our grief so that other people can be more public with their grief,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just a vicious cycle I think we're on. And yeah, the Disney bubble gives you the opportunity to dip a toe into what that feels like, I think.
Yeah, and there's a few things I want to say, but when you said go back to the hotel room and cry, immediately I thought of like, this is why this is why it's important to stay in the Disney bubble, especially as a solo, because first you can get to and from a lot easier than waiting for an Uber or driving, but also then you still are within this particular safe vacation.
Yeah.
And if you're in your beautiful hotel room, even if it's value, even if it's moderate, you are still kind of close enough to the action that you can then be like, all right, I took the time that I needed. Let's go
Yeah.
back, right? One of the things that I like to do, even though it's not related to grief, is like when I take a midday nap, I just like leave the music on related to the hotel, because it just kind of keeps you in that space. So there are ways that like you can honor those feelings but still be on a Disney vacation. You don't need to like close those two things off.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to separate. I think that's what we do every day
Yeah.
in normal life is we're separate, 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 and compartmentalize all of these pieces of our life. I got to head into this meeting. I got to stop crying. I got to keep myself together. I got to put some lipstick on, whatever
Yeah.
we're doing to cope. And you can, like you said, that integration that Disney does so well. I'm helping my best friend plan their first family Disney trip with their little one. I know, I'm so excited.
Tell them
And
to do less. I mean, that's like my
yes,
only tip
yes,
for young families, like just do less.
less,
Yeah.
yes. But they were like, why should we stay on campus, as I call it? And I'm
Yeah.
like, listen, the
Crazy.
integration is just part of it. It keeps you connected in this really cool way. And even as a soloist, I noticed it, maybe even more, to be honest. Like you said, having the music in your hotel room and
Yeah.
having it just, like, let it go and come in and out. And I would be like, oh, I'm still, I'm alone, but I'm
Disney.
not
Yeah.
alone,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a
Well, and
really,
one thing I talked about in an episode where I did one night at an offsite hotel, that as a woman, as soon as I entered the lobby of the offsite hotel, my nervous system automatically was like, well, you gotta like make sure that people don't know you're a woman by yourself staying in a hotel room, and walking down the hall. And like, if like I take my Disney vacations as a form of healing and joy, and I don't want my nervous system to be on fire like that. And if you're taking your Disney vacations as a way to work through grief and healing, then don't put your nervous system in a situation where it needs to do additional work. Like let it do the work in a safe environment.
yeah. And maybe that's what I was feeling while I was
Mm,
there. I was feeling that subconscious knowing of being safe and knowing where things were and being kind of like adjusted, and that allowed for more
yeah.
freedom, for things to come up and for me to like focus in different ways than I think I definitely would have not felt like that staying off, you know, property.
Yeah.
Especially as a female traveler,
Yeah.
would not have enjoyed that at all.
There's so many other things just like flashing, right?
Yeah,
Your
yeah,
your your system is doing so many other things. I did a bit of a grief trip to Jamaica solo, and there were like moments that were really fantastic, but there were fantastic in terms of like grief and healing. But there
yeah,
were a lot of other times where I literally like zipped up, like
yeah,
zipped up those emotions in order to like be able to like navigate an all-inclusive, like very secluded, not secluded, well, it was, but very bound hotel in order to be safer in these places. And at Disney, there isn't that. In fact, I love how you said that like Disney allows for these big emotions because I did an episode for Patreon, I think, about Cool Kid Summer, or maybe it was like a regular episode for Cool Kid Summer. And I said, like, go to Hollywood Studios, but you can do this at any park and like use the opportunity to like use your lungs to scream and yell and sing on roller coasters or on a sing along. And it's like if you're the type of person that I've learned a lot of solo Disney travelers are who really like to plan things, then you can also plan these places or these times where you can let out other noises and other emotions,
yes,
whether it's on a 3 minute roller coaster or in a Beauty and the Beast sing along that
yeah.
you wouldn't have done normally. And that's important.
It is. It's very important. It's interesting you say that because I was at a retreat recently. It was just kind of like a general, like, women's wellness retreat. And we did mantras. And this woman led us in doing these mantras. And I had this realization while we were doing it, like, I don't hear my own voice most days in
Mm,
that singular, like, I don't project, I don't sing, I might sing a song that's on the radio or something like that, but you don't really like focus in on your own voice. And the release that you can get from that is amazing. And so
yeah.
yeah, go scream your heart out on Tower of Terror and enjoy that kind of like physical release.
Yeah.
A lot of what we do with Mourning Feather involves physical movement. We do grief hikes,
Mm,
and it's just like the moving of the body. And they're not really hikes per se. It's more of a leisurely stroll with friends, but it helps process as we're talking to each other. That movement, as
mhm.
minimal as it is, makes a difference. And it's the same thing at Disney. You're definitely getting your steps in at Disney.
Right.
So you know, even if you're thinking to yourself and you're not speaking to someone else, that's helping kind of like move things through. And, it helps overall to feel good. And I think everybody needs a primal scream every once in a while.
Yes. There was a reel going around where this woman, she's like, I went to the woods to like scream across somebody else's trauma. Did you see that? Because then there's this guy that like runs on the bush, like, oh no, what's happening?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
so fine,
I mean,
do it on a roller coaster.
powerful. Go do it. Yeah. And I mean, it's built in. I think that's kind of the point is like you've got a lot of built-ins at Disney,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the joy and a place to scream and, or sing-alongs. Go to the Frozen sing-along or
yeah.
something and find that kind of like just joy of communal singing. I mean, that's important too.
And laughing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. A friend of mine whose father passed away, she was, lying on the couch a week after, and then it was like, 6 months of hospice, so they were in it for a very long time. And her uncle was like, you got to get up and you got to move because healing doesn't happen through calcification, it happens through movement. And I think that when we're through deep grief, especially when we feel kind of numbed out, that I can imagine like just doing a lap around Magic Kingdom, right? Can tune you in to other things happening that can just focus your body and your mind and your emotions in different places. And you might be surprised with what comes up. But it's like these trips to Disney don't have to be, you're going to do everything, you're going to eat everything. It can just be like be in a safe place and
Yeah.
allow yourself to move in these places. And America doesn't have a lot of walkable spaces, walkable safe spaces. And so you might just think of this as like a hiking, quote unquote, hiking vacation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, yeah, just doing a lap around Epcot was kind of what I did.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was kind of like my down day. It was kind of like, I don't have any plans. I'm not meeting up with anybody. So I would just kind of like pass through and it really did. It makes a difference. And I think it also just like, it makes you feel a little more grounded and present. And even
Hmm.
if you're watching other people have their experiences, there's something in that too that kind of like just makes you feel warm and fuzzy. And I think you can go as a soloist with less planning and feel okay about it. I know that when I go with others or when I'm going with a big group, a family or friends group, I feel on. I feel
Hmm.
like, we're going to do this and then we're going to do that and we're going to, go here and have you seen this? And as a soloist, you get that total freedom to be like, you know what, actually, no, I don't actually want to go over there and see that right now. I want to sit right here and
Yep.
just look at the water and take in this moment and feel safe and secure about where I am. I think that's just like invaluable.
Yeah. And I think too that you can do that trip solo without actually having to go to the parks at all. Like if you already feel like there's going to be a lot happening for you, you can go to the Walt Disney Resort property, which is the size of San Francisco, and explore all the different hotels, take all the different boats,
Yeah.
swim in your own pool, like you can do a lot of stuff that also is unrelated to the parks. I got this great message from somebody that did the contemporary watching the fireworks hack that I suggested on the outside of the building. And like, there's so many things that you can do to like not feel pressure to be in the parks, not feel pressure to like make use of the money that you spent on the parks,
Yeah.
but still be in this safe Disney bubble and get what you need from a nice, safe trip that allows you to connect with yourself and connect with a larger. I mean, that's the thing about grief too, right? It's very isolating so that you are connecting and connected with a larger community, even if they aren't sharing that experience. There's just something about that Disney bubble where you're like, oh, we're all kind of kin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because when I came back from my trip, I was telling my therapist about it, and she was like, this is fascinating. She was like, you really had yourself a journey out there, girl. And I was
Yeah.
like, I did. I really did. And it was like, there's so much about Disney that can be not just grief, processing, but like healing your inner child.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
Yep.
So many of us missed out on opportunities for this, that, or the other that have stayed with us in ways you don't really realize until you go there. And
Hmm.
especially when you go alone and have the time to like really reflect and think back about like, wow, why is this touching me in this way right now? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, because of that thing.
Right. 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 And
Yeah.
that's why I think this is such an interesting episode, depending on where people are in their lives, because whenever we're talking about healing on the podcast, and we do that with like every solo story, there's always a flip side of that. There's healing from something, that there's also grief. And that is, I mean, you could just be, I spoke to this one woman, Wendy Green, and she's like, I went on my solo trip in order to do all the things that this abused 7-year-old girl was not able to do. Right. And so, it was like a grief for this childhood that she wasn't able to have, but now she's able to make these choices. And I think Disney too allows for you to be joyful as an expression of grief as well, right? Like if something has happened and people are expecting you to grieve in certain ways, you can be like, actually, the way I want to best grieve this thing is just to laugh and just to sing and just to really like allow the 7-year-old to be the full expression of herself, right? Or himself or their self. So there's just so much that is ripe there. Before yeah, please, do you have anything to say to that before I add
No, I
another
was,
point?
we really are just stuck in this space that we're supposed to grieve in a certain way. There's these, there are steps to grieving, and you've heard of denial and da da da, but everyone's grief journey is different. And I think people who are likely to go on a Disney solo trip are probably in the perfect position to own the way they want to grieve
Mm-hmm.
more than anybody else, because I feel like Disney adults are already like unapologetically going for it, We're like, no, we're going to Disney and I'm staying
Yeah.
at the yacht club and
Yeah.
I'm spending the extra money. So we, I think, are in a good position to also think about that in terms of like what grieving looks like for us, and just kind of making that statement and saying, nope, this is going to be about joy, and this is going to be about living, and this is going to be about life for me. And that's perfectly okay
Mm-hmm.
because this is mine.
Now, I can imagine people being wary of taking kind of like a grief trip or leaning into their grief on a solo Disney trip because of the expected embarrassment they might have for crying in public. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. I've talked often that I had like a nervous breakdown on Mission Space and I could not stop crying. So these aren't grief tears, but these are a grown woman crying in a bathroom tears, talking to herself, being like, "Why are you crying? You're at Disney." Maybe because it was all too much. And even though we talk about Disney as like a big community, and so you would think the community people would like rally to you. At the same time, people don't my experience, number one, is that I've never really seen people crying, which means that people are doing their own thing. That's not something I'm like tuned into. Number two, that people are aware of everything, of the emotional aspect of this whole thing, and you're giving you space. And that three, if I think a lot of times people can see the difference between crying because you're in crisis versus crying because you need a moment, and that I do feel like there's intervention that a cast member would intervene if there was a problem. So I want to put people's worries to rest, that if they're just a big crying mess, that people are going to like point and laugh and blah 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 blah, but also to recognize like people are actually crying there all the time, and it's not as much of a thing as we are expecting it to be if it was happening in the real world. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about crying in public ever is that you're going to get kind of like one or the other reaction from people. There are going to be like the people that I would call like the helpers, who are going to kind of flock right to you and check on you. And then there's going to be the people that are so uncomfortable by your tears that they're just going to kind of like slowly, back into the hedge and kind of like exit. And I don't think it'll be any different at Disney. I think you're gonna, if you happen to find yourself in a space with somebody who kind of like is okay with emotion and big feelings, they'll probably be like, "Are you okay?" But nobody is going to point and laugh if you started crying at the grocery store, I think no one's going to point and laugh, you
Right,
know?
right.
Like,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is all stuff we have up in our
Right,
head.
right.
And I think, you know, part of why it's so important to grieve openly and grieve publicly is to remove that kind of weird stigma that we've created. And, you know, I've I've noticed this thing in women, particularly in women, because we've had a few men come to some of our events, grief events. They do not apologize when they cry.
Mm,
If they are, you know, male leaning, they do not apologize when they're cry. Female leaning always say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, and try to get themselves together. And it's just like a little interesting dynamic that I think we can't escape even if we're at Disney. So
yeah, yeah.
that, but nobody, I think people are so wrapped into their own stuff, especially big families. Like they're making sure their kids haven't wandered and, you know, most people won't even see that you're crying. I
Yeah.
think it's so busy. Cast members would probably be the most likely to interact with you, and they're certainly not going to point and laugh. So, you
Uh,
know,
and I actually do think there's a third type of person though at Disney, which is the person that like sees it and like lets you have your space.
yeah, yeah,
Like
acknowledging that,
also
like,
it's just
oh, okay,
like
yeah,
sending you good vibes,
yeah.
let you have your moment, right?
Right. I mean, I've often seen people kind of upset in different spaces and just kind of been like, you good? Just a
Yeah.
little thumbs up, you
Yeah.
good?
Yeah.
And if they're like,
Yeah.
then off I go, you know?
Yeah.
But I think, you know, it's so busy there. It's like a hustle and a bustle that it's almost, think of it as like a cloaking device, honestly.
Yeah.
It could
Yeah.
probably fully fall apart in a little side piece of some ride. And I don't think people, there would be a lot of like invisibility to it where you could just kind of be there and be
Yeah.
doing that
Yeah.
and go undetected.
I interviewed one woman for the podcast and I said, "What's your favorite thing to do solo?" And she said, "Cry."
Yeah.
She's like, "That's the place I go to cry because it actually feels safer, emotionally safer for me to cry in this public space, this specific public space,
Yeah.
than to cry in other spaces where I can't predict how the people that I know very well are going to react to it."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing is like big public feelings are something we avoid.
Yeah.
There's somehow we've attached embarrassment to that. We've attached some kind of like, oh, I'm troubling you with the way that I feel with that. And I think, you know, no, go to Disney and cry. It's kind of the best, honestly. It really is to just let
Yeah.
yourself feel the things and know that like everybody else is feeling them to a degree too.
Yeah.
And this is how it comes out of you. And that's great.
Yeah. Or they're so settled down with kids and diapers and bubble wands that they're like, I can't, like whatever happens. It's,
Yeah, I think I only cried. I did a different cry when
yeah.
I was taking my kiddo through the parks as a little one. I was like, oh my God, I'm so exhausted.
I know. I remember somebody asking me like, well, isn't it weird to be solo at a value resort? And I was like, oh my God, no, they are so insular. Those big families are so insular that I mean, at first I want to give them all hugs, but also like nobody's watching you. As we wrap up this conversation, do you have any tips for if people are planning on going to Disney as a bit of an explicit kind of grief trip, or it winds up being like that? Do you have any recommendations for like preparation or like a post-trip kind of
Yeah,
consolidation or anything?
absolutely. I would say one big thing is kind of like think about intention. So,
Mm,
like, and if you're a person who journals or likes to write things down, write down a couple of intentions for your trip. What are you trying to like think about, work through, spend time focusing on? And then maybe think about the action that goes with that. Like, is it going to be a lot of walking? Do you want to do a lot of movement? Do you want to pixie dust in memorandum? Do you want to, I don't know, have a really special experience that's an extra that goes along with your particular grief journey in some way? Or do you want to do something completely out of your comfort zone and see how that makes you feel? You know, like I think just think about things in terms of total freedom Of course, financially responsible if you want to be or not.
That's right. That is a choice we all make.
Choice we all have. But yeah, thinking about, there's a lot of power in ritual. And so maybe your person was a huge fireworks fan. So maybe you want to see every fireworks show. And, like just make it a thing. It doesn't have to have been an existing thing. You can create whatever you want. And what a
Hmm.
better place to tap into creating your own magic than Disney?
Hmm. I love that. I love that. And how about any post-trip
Yeah, I
consolidation?
journaled. I
Love
went
it.
like just in and I just wrote and wrote and wrote about everything that kind of came up. And I didn't necessarily need to like have an ending. It was more of a free write situation that I did.
Mm,
And that was at the suggestion of my personal therapist who was like, just free write. Don't try to force yourself into a box, just see what comes out. And it was interesting. It was definitely interesting
interesting.
what came out. So I would say, if that's your thing, and another thing that I found interesting is doing audio recordings, just talking to yourself.
Hmm.
And because sometimes that means you're not kind of like confined to the, oh, I spelled that wrong and now I got to scratch that out.
Yeah.
You can kind of just flow and just say what you want to. Nobody ever has to hear it, and it's your own thing. But, sometimes that helps just to like speak it and get it out of your
Hmm.
body. So yeah, I mean, I think those two things would really help kind of like bookend a trip like that.
I love that. I love those suggestions. To pick up on that with like things that I've done too is like I'll take a souvenir that doesn't seem like a souvenir, like a napkin, right?
Yeah.
Like and like charge those things with the power of the um trip, or I'll find like audio tracks on YouTube as a way to like connect with a particular place where I had a particular moment, right? Like there's like material, but like audio ways too that you can connect with that spirit of that trip. And I mean, for me, that would be the ultimate goal of the podcast to know that people can take these solo trips and have these really significant experiences in their lives to help them just be fuller, stronger, more healed, more integrated humans. And that involves being really intentional about going through the grieving process. So thank you so much for bringing that to the podcast. How can people get in touch with you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, yeah. So you can find Mourning Feather Doulas at Mourning Feather, and that's mourning as in loss, mourningfeatherdoulas.com. We're also on Instagram primarily, and that's mourning_feather_doulas.
And the links to those are below. Mel, thank you so much. This was really wonderful and so uplifting. And I hope that people listen to this episode about grief and think of it in very uplifting, inspirational ways. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey Solos, it's Samantha. I hope you enjoyed this episode and all the episodes of Disney Solo Magic, the #1 podcast for solo travel to Disney World. You can reach me on all of the different social media. All of those links are in this description below. You can also listen to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and on YouTube. It'd be really great if you rated, reviewed, and subscribed. It's really a wonderful way to let other people know about the podcast. And as you know, we also have a Patreon where you can get bonus content, you can get bonus episodes, you can get all of the videos of us doing the solo stories, and a whole bunch more. So come and join us on Patreon. And thanks again for listening to the podcast. Bye.